Steeler Nation, we are back for another great week of shows on the one and only The Sick Podcast, Steeler Crazy. I am Jay York Football. Next to me is Mic'd Up Sports One. Hopefully all the floods in South Florida are under control, and you seem to be doing well. I don't see a raft or an inner tube anywhere in your background. How's everything?
We're good, man. One day of sun and that stuff is cleared up quicker than you can believe. So all is good down here. You guys are hotter than South Florida right now in the Burgh. I don't want to sit here and talk weather all day on a freaking Steelers podcast like we've never met each other and we're going for a dog walk right now. But it is kind of trippy, man. So hope everybody's staying cool up there and the ACs are working and that everybody's power is back on as well. I know you guys had some crazy storms.
Yeah. My power is out for 3 hours, but we're ready to get this episode going. We have a great guest today. Going to talk some salary cap, maybe some Cam Heyward, and just the total outlook of the Pittsburgh Steelers going into this season. Jimmy, take it to the end zone.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Steelers Crazy.
Harris Smith shields. Flacco, Polamalu takes it home. Super Bowl 43. Pittsburgh might be bound for that thanks to number 43.
The sickest Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Sports entertainment like no other. It's gonna be sick.
Yes, sir. Our guest today, he does it all. Some salary cap, some NFL draft. Find him at Roto Underworld. NFL analyst, of course, at Naduri NFL. It's none other than Anand Naduri. Anand, how are you today, man?
What's up, fellas? Checking in from sunny Chicago. Excited to talk some Steelers ball with you guys.
Chicago gets super hot in the summer, too. I mean, everywhere does at this point. But I remember hitting up Wrigley Field a couple of years ago for a Cubs game in the middle of July and got the bleacher seats, of course. I had to be a bleacher boy out there and kind of died a little bit. There were not enough libations to keep me cool.
It's like that sometimes, man. It's 95 out here today, so
yeah. I did see a Pittsburgh Pirates win though, so we're gonna take that to the bank. Hey, man, let's talk about obviously Pittsburgh sports team. You mentioned it off air that has just made headline after headline this offseason. The Pittsburgh Steelers. The current state of this team, the transformation. You go from Kenny Pickett to Russell Wilson. First of all, what are your thoughts on Russ being a Pittsburgh Steeler?
I think Omar Khan is one of the smarter individuals we have in the league, period. And to go from what Kenny Pickett was, which I think a lot of people would admit was a spot where the guy that they wanted fell to them. You know, they weren't willing to trade up into the top 10. They didn't think he was a top 10 talent because otherwise they would have done that. And they kind of let him fall to where they got him. They were excited about him. They hoped he would develop. He didn't quite develop in the way that they hoped. Now you bring in for next to nothing, not only Russell Wilson, a guy that probably will, if not get into the Hall of Fame, will absolutely get enough votes to get close to getting into the Hall of Fame. And Justin Fields, who's one of the more dynamic young playmakers we have, even if it hasn't translated to wins and losses yet. To do all of that and be paying them less than $5 million total is crazy. I don't understand how everybody else let that happen. And I understand that there are reservations about what Russell Wilson is and is not at this stage of his career. But, I mean, the night and day difference between the talent that's going to be in that room versus what it was a year ago is just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a Rams fan, correct?
Yes, sir.
And a dedicated follower. So you've seen a lot of the next guy I'm going to mention who has just been all over social media, NFL headlines too, national media. We're kind of getting sick of it a little bit in Pittsburgh, but Brandon Aiyuk is the guy I'm talking about here. Steelers have been, I don't think reported is the right word, but connected to some degree because of their need in terms of a wide receiver too. Do you think that he ultimately gets moved, or Deebo Samuel maybe?
I think, one of them is probably likely to get moved. I think they're going to ask for too much because if I'm John Lynch, I'd ask for too much. Whenever you trade for a player, the thing that gets kind of buried under there is you're rarely trading for the player. You're trading for the right to pay the player also. So you're not just trading for Aiyuk, you're trading for the right to pay him $30+ million a year. I saw something really interesting the other day. Frank Michael Smith's a buddy of mine, and he threw something out there that I thought was brilliant. The odd man out in Seattle right now is Tyler Lockett.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, obviously they spent the draft capital on Smith and Jigba. They paid DK Metcalf all of this money. If you're going to try to make Russ work, why not go get his security blanket for basically his entire career instead of trying to pay Aiyuk $30 million and hope that it all meshes and works out? I thought that was a super interesting angle and kind of the whole will Aiyuk end up a Pittsburgh Steeler thing. But I just, it's not in their nature to trade for guys like that and pay them $30 million. I just don't see it happening. Obviously, they've made moves this past offseason that, we haven't really seen Pittsburgh make before. But I find it hard to stomach that they would trade for and then pay a guy $35 million.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on Roman Wilson, kid out of Michigan, Steelers
He's
third-round
great.
pick? There you go. That'll work.
He's great.
That'll work.
And I think, you want to talk about guys that there are guys that you have to drag off the field kicking and screaming, and those guys usually end up being Steelers or Ravens. He's one of those guys. Yeah.
Feels like one of those, another security blanket type guy, maybe not right away, but down the line. Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we talked about this off air as well. So is paying Cam Heyward long-term the wrong move?
I just think you got to get younger. I'm a Buckeye. That's my guy.
Me too. I feel the same.
That's my guy. And Pittsburgh's ownership and their general management has done such a fantastic job of keeping Steelers for so long. You can go back as far as you want, whether it's Jerome Bettis, Hines Wharton, and all of their guys, right? It's just there comes a time where we can't pay you what you want to be paid. And if someone else, we're happy to let you go. I just think that there's going to be a spot where Pittsburgh's going to have to get younger. And as much as I love Cam, as productive as I still think he could be, you cannot pay someone into the future for what they have been. That's a really easy way for your defense to get expensive and old rather quickly. And you just can't afford that. So I would say if it was me, the numbers that have been floated out there, I'd probably be moving on.
Yeah, and that says a lot, you being a Buckeye. So, and we love Cam Heyward, and we know that, he's a Steeler through and through, but at the end of the day, like, you have to be realistic, and it just doesn't make sense. I think it would actually be detrimental to the team, if I'm being completely honest. Like, if you're in the grand scheme of things, like, and I'm all for guys, going to bat for themselves, like, hey, get your money. But as far as, like, if I'm trying to compose a Super Bowl caliber roster, I don't think that that's the way to go at all. So we'll flip over to the other side of the ball, the offensive side of the ball. Do you think this is the year that George Pickens really breaks out? We know that, with a competent quarterback, and even with Mason Rudolph a little bit last year towards the end of the season, he showed spurts of being an NFL superstar. We know that it's there, but do you think that this is the season that he takes that next step and solidifies that?
I think he's going to firmly establish himself as probably a top 15 guy. It's tough that upper echelon is so filled with the super duper stars that have true number one quarterbacks that you feel very good about. Whereas I think he's in that range where there will be games where he looks like the best player in the league at times. I mean, he's made some catches where you sit there and you're like, oh my God, the Steelers have another one, whether it was Mike Wallace, whether it was Antonio Brown, you go on down the line, Emmanuel Sanders, take your pick. But I think that the consistency of what he was doing late in the season, you want to see a full season of that to kind of push him into that top 15, top 12. It's there. The talent's never been a question. The big question that I have is how will he and Russ mesh? Because Russell Wilson is an all-time quarterback, even if he's not the guy that he was before. He's an all-time quarterback, and Sean Payton's an all-time head coach, an offensive innovator. And if they were that far apart, if in terms of what they could do together, you kind of hope that giving him a guy like Pickens that, even though he doesn't necessarily separate the way that most guys separate, is still able to make those ridiculously tough contested catches. And you hope that Russ has enough left in the tank to get the ball to him in those spots where he can make those catches in those dying moments that you need him.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, it is tough. I mean, there is a lot of great wide receivers in the NFL, so I'll take top 15 any day. At this point, I think in Pittsburgh, we're just happy to, I know it's all hypothetically speaking, but you would like to think that we have competent quarterback with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. I'm really high on Russell Wilson. I think that he's rejuvenated. I know he came out and said he's 25. Like, if we could cut that, like we're talking 13 touchdowns from our quarterback in 2 seasons. Russ
26 for Russ
yeah.
last year. Good year. I mean, under the radar, but not a bad year. Beat the Bills, beat the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little bit, high because everyone's coming in hot, but we'll let that play on the field speak for itself. So before I throw it back over to Mike, I want to talk about the Steelers draft class. Talk about this offensive line. Did they make the right moves focusing on that? I'd like to think so. You win games up front. Just talk about that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems with Kenny Pickett's development was the guys in front of him didn't give him time to sit there and play quarterback. He was so many of, if you go back and you watch a lot of the plays that people got excited about from Kenny Pickett, they're all escaping the pocket and doing something crazy. And, as much as Russell Wilson is also that guy that is capable of doing those things when he was younger, I don't know how much of it he still got left in him. But the guys up front have been how Pittsburgh has won forever. And I think they're getting back to their identity. I think they realize that they can draft wide receiver better than everybody else because they do. They have drafted wide receiver better than anybody else for about 15, 20 years. And they haven't needed first-round picks to do it. They found Antonio Brown. They found Mike Wallace, Emmanuel Sanders. You go down the list all the way down. And Pickens seems to be the next one of them. I love Calvin Austin. There's so much to like about what they can do in the mid to late rounds at wide receiver that, other teams are investing first round draft capital into. I think it made a lot of sense for them to kind of invest in their O-line, invest in the D-line, which I would expect to see next year early and often in terms of, potential Cam Heyward replacements like we were talking about. Because I think when you look at what that defense is, it's nasty. I mean, nobody wants to go to Pittsburgh and play what that defense looks like, especially when everyone's healthy. You're in a third down situation and you've got Renegade blaring. Like, nobody wants to go into that. And I say that as a fan of a different team. Absolute nightmare.
That means a lot coming from you.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Mike.
For sure. Yeah, you guys are hanging out here on the Sick Podcast, Steelers Crazy. Pleasure to be joined by Anand Naduri. You can find him at Naduri NFL. I want to talk a little bit about AFC contenders and pretenders. I guess my first question to you is, right when the schedule comes out, we have so much evaluating. I can't believe they play this team in week X at this location. Are you a believer in strength of schedule?
Strength of schedule, I think, does matter, but it matters a lot more in retrospect than it does looking forward, because we're basing how tough these teams are based on what they were in 2023. Whereas I think as you prepare for the playoffs, you can get a much better idea of how tough a team's schedule was. Looking back at what their 2024 results were as you basically head into the postseason and look at it that way. I do think that there are what I would call scheduled losses for NFL teams. Going 17-0 is impossibly difficult for almost anybody. And I think that there are spots where as a team, you just got to understand, look, like it's going to take 100% of our effort to turn it around on this Thursday night on the West Coast. Does it make sense to conserve a little bit of the game plan? Understand that if we get into a dogfight, we get into a dogfight, and that's great. But do we really want to empty the playbook, let everything fly for this Thursday night game, 1,500 miles from home? I think those kinds of things are things that you look at. You look at obviously international games. You look at back-to-backs when you're on the road 2 weeks in a row. You look at, all of the standalone games, whether that's Christmas, Thanksgiving, Monday night, Thursday night. As you kind of put that whole schedule together and you kind of look at where are the places where we don't think we're vulnerable as a team that we might be vulnerable, and where are other teams, where do we stack up on other teams' schedules where, we might get Buffalo, for example, on a weekend of a back-to-back where they've got a Thursday night and then they're preparing for someone else on the road, and then they have us on the road the following week after. I think you can look at some of those and kind of find where you have opportunities to beat teams that, if you really think about it, going head up, straight up with 3 weeks rest, they're probably the better team.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And when the Steelers' schedule came out, um, you know, I think the main thing I looked at was the fact that towards the end of the season, they have 3 games and I want to say 11 days, maybe 10 days. They have the Chiefs on Christmas, short week against the Eagles on a Thursday, and I think the Ravens
Oh
the
my
following
God.
Saturday, maybe. It's disgusting. But at the same time, to the point that I have made all off season, everybody last year, Steelers schedule comes out and they say, oh my gosh, last couple of games, you got the Bengals and you got the Ravens at their houses. You end up facing Jake Browning and Tyler Huntley, right? Like you don't know, and you
You
win
don't
both
know.
of those games. So I
Yeah.
mean, I just think there's so much that's obviously up in the air. I want to throw a couple teams at you before we get out of here. I think assuming at full health, Chiefs are good, Bengals are good, Ravens are excellent. I think the Jets will be really, really good if Rodgers stays healthy. Talk to me about the Cleveland Browns. There's an Ohio connection right there. Where are they in the pecking order?
I think so much of that is entirely dependent on the guy that wears number 4 there. And, it's the reason that I say that they're impossible to forecast. They're the team I think has the widest range of outcomes of any of the AFC quote unquote contenders. Because the Jets will know basically Rodgers' health is either good, not good. Left tackle, right tackle, health good, not good. That'll tell you everything you need to know about their season. Whereas Cleveland isn't worried necessarily about health. It's basically, is 2020 Deshaun Watson in there somewhere? And if he is, then Cleveland is absolutely a legitimate contender. And if he's not, then they need to find a way to get $60 million worth of quarterback play out of somebody.
Good
And
luck.
that is a very, very, very tough mountain to climb. There's very few
Is
guys
that the
who've
most
ever-
Cleveland thing ever to spend all that money and just have no results? Like that has to be. I mean, I know you're an Ohio State guy, but
it reeked of, to me, that the thing is, I was more shocked that Atlanta was involved in that than I was that Cleveland was involved in that.
Yeah.
Just because you've had Matt Ryan, you've seen what great QB play looks like for a decade and a half. Why are that made sense to me. It is, it was watching Baker do what he did in Tampa last year had to be so satisfying for him and all of the people that were like, hey, why don't we just keep Baker Mayfield?
Yeah.
But man, that's a real tough pill to swallow because every dollar that contract's guaranteed and you're still staring down 180, 150 million of that left. Just crazy.
Yeah. It's unreal.
One last one. It seems like I did some scrolling on X. Seems like you're pretty high on the Texans.
I am high on the Texans. I'm high on the Texans, CJ, obviously, but I think that the way that they've stacked chips, built their offensive line out, then they brought in Nico Collins. Tank Dell obviously is a rookie, exploded. Diggs is a big question mark for me because I don't know how he's going to fit in that locker room, but if he does, the talent's there. Tight ends solidified. They brought in Joe Mixon, and then the defense is the side of the ball that their head coach D'Amico Ryans runs, and they've brought in blue chip talent there over and over and over again. Do I think that they're going to make a run to win the Super Bowl? Probably not. But I think that on their best day, they can take out a Kansas City. They can take out a Baltimore. They can take out any of these top AFC contenders, which for a long time, the team that, we kind of saw as the ones that could do that was Cincinnati. And when they're all firing on all cylinders, absolutely. I think Cincinnati's still in there. But Houston to me is just, they might be so young that they don't know what they don't know yet. Kind of like since he was in 2021, where they just happen to make the miracle run and get to New Orleans.
Is that you're sticking by that? I know it's early.
I don't know that I'm gonna actually stick by that because I think KC to get the 3-peat might be even crazier than that. that might be where I'm going.
If anyone can do it, though, I would. Don't bet against them. To put it that way.
Yeah.
Before we get you out of here, I had one more question, and then I would love you to tell our viewers where they can find you at as well. But what is your really, really early prediction? Like, what do you see? I guess I can put it this way. What do you see as a successful season for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I think if it looks like through the middle of the season, if we're in week 10 and Russell Wilson has been a success, if they're 6-4, 6-3, 5-4, something in there, and it looks like there's a legitimate chance that they can make the AFC playoff rotation,
I thought you were going to say AFC Championship. I'm like, whoa.
No. If they look like they are on a trajectory where they can get an AFC playoff spot and potentially make some noise, injuries happen every year, and that's the toughest part of this to predict. Is we're talking about all these teams at full strength. Somebody's going to lose their quarterback. Someone's going to lose their edge rusher. Someone's going to lose their left tackle. All these things happen. I think the success story for Pittsburgh would be if either or Russ or Justin Fields proves to be the quarterback for the next 2 to 3 years where you feel good about him. And then you can build almost immediately on how good the defense is. Maybe you have the breakout year that we were talking about from Pickens. But I think all of these things go hand in hand. If one of the quarterbacks that are new proves to be the guy, I think Pittsburgh's going to be perfectly fine, and I would call it successful.
Yeah, I have to agree there. Hey, it's been a pleasure having you on. Just tell us where everyone can find your work at, social media, whatever you got, some fun stuff going on. Love to hear it.
Yeah, so at Naduri NFL on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, whatever changes its name to next week, who knows. I obviously host a podcast called Decision Point with Matt Kelly, player profiler, where we kind of talk about NFL GMs and what their jobs actually are versus how they're projected, because they get talked about side by side with head coaches and their jobs are vastly different. We think of general managers in a 3 to 5 year window, whereas coaches are asked to maximize the talent that they get on the field every single year. And so even though they're talked about hand in hand and they often get hired and fired together, they're really on different timelines. So we kind of dive into that and what we like and don't like about how teams go about building things. Obviously, Pittsburgh, one of the better, organizations in pro sports, really. But we have fun over there. I obviously hop on podcasts like this from time to time. So obviously happy if anybody wants to reach out and talk ball at any time, man. This is what we do.
Hey, well, we really appreciate your time. It's been great. Just your expertise and everything. So we look forward to everything that you have going on, and we'll have to definitely do it again. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Mike.
Enjoy.
Cool stuff, man. Always nice when somebody believes in some players that we aren't necessarily high on. Calvin Austin, there you go right there. The guy studies the draft, obviously is, extremely knowledgeable when it comes to the league. I know you and I don't necessarily love him, but man, if he can find it and take a next step, given the fact that you have Pickens, given the fact that you have Roman Wilson, how big would that be for this offense? It might be one of the biggest things that could happen. Yeah, I don't see that.
Yeah, but I don't really like something, me personally, I don't take into account, like, I'm not like these, he's having a great practice. Like, show me it on the field. I don't care. We're gonna circle back around to this. Remember, Kenny Pickett was the dark horse MVP candidate after the preseason. Until week 1, and you've seen what happened week 1 with the 49ers last season. So until I see it on a regular season and on a consistent basis, I'm not sold. So I want every single person on that 50th.
Remember, we can use the argument that, hey, Pickens, was held back by Pickett. Pat Freiermuth maybe held back by Pickett. Maybe Calvin also held back by Pickett. So we'll see, because he's only had him, right? That's it. He's only had him. We'll see.
Unless they trade for Brandon Aiyuk. What do you think? He's Mike Tomlin's twin.
We'll have to do an emergency podcast.
Oh, man. But, hey, yeah, that was really cool. And I think that everyone's on the same page. I mean, he strictly is a salary cap guy, as we know. And for him to say that about Cam Heyward, and he's an Ohio State guy, it just, the longevity of it, it just absolutely doesn't make any sense. I would love Cam Heyward to retire as a Steeler, but at the end of the day, I want to win a Super Bowl. And I hope that we can get Cam a Super Bowl, but something's got to give. Something got to meet in the middle. So we'll see. I wish the best for everyone. Like I said, anyone on that 53-man roster, I'm rooting for you. Practice squad, I don't care. Water boy, black and gold till I'm dead and cool, baby. So it's been another great episode. I am Jay York Football. This is Mic'd Up Sports 1. Jimmy, get ready for the punt.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Steelers Crazy on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.